free software. The next talk will try to focus on the impact of digital privacy in real life privacy and how in our context or in our field of work, how should we respectively look into these aspects and how we can intervene in. Right. Right. So I'm not sure how many of you have read the Human Development Index. It's called HDI Index. It came out in 2019, which very clearly calls out saying that technology, education, and climate are the next generation poverty. Right. So if we start analyzing what are the current generation poverties, it's primarily food, water, scarcity, shelter, which is exactly why most of our educational systems, everybody has been talking about these are the essential things, etc., right? But at this point in time, it is very important for us to understand that the intervention or the correlation of these three is going to create the larger set of poverty in the upcoming years. Now, let's understand the section of education in the current context. So far, whatever data I'm presenting, I'm trying to stick purely only to the official data, right? I am not trying to present data from anything other than the official sources. If I am presenting such data, I will explicitly qualify or notify, right? So if we look at this is again from the ministry, the Census India, right? The number of people, the percentage of people completing secondary education in India is in the rural it's about 30%, in the urban it's about 57, 58%, right? And mind you, potentially secondary education means anything between 8th standard to 10th standard. Roughly, people qualify 10th, you should pass for you to be secondary education, but yeah. Now, amongst the population that we have, about 130 crore odd population, in terms of computer ownership, that is, people who have access to a computer, right? Desktop, laptop, computer, whatever sort. In the rural household, it's only about 4%, right? Versus in the urban household, it's about 23%. Obviously, the current pandemic has had an impact. All of us have been reading on news on how so many of them had to sell their cows, their lands, just to buy laptop to their kids so that they can attend classes, the so-called online classes. But what is important for us to understand was while we read these stories, it's important to understand how the state of technology and technology penetration actually was, right? And this is the actual number on what was the actual technology penetration, which is exactly what makes these stories even more important to watch out for, to look for, because we're talking about 4.4% of household and that growing to possibly 7% or 8%. And the cost of going from 4.4% to 7-8% is exactly the news articles that we are reading, right? Where we have heard stories of selling cows, selling the only source of income and everything. And in terms of mobile ownership, I'm not specifically talking about non-smartphones. I'm specifically talking about smartphones, right? That's about 36%. These are all again as of 2019. Now, if you have to really analyze this, especially in the context of education and access to digital devices, amongst the 50% nationwide internet penetration that we have, the urban is having about 42% of it, whereas the rural is only having about 15% approximately, right? And even in that, only 8% of the students in our country actually have access to internet and digital devices, right? So which means it's only 8% of the population that's actually getting benefited in the whole idea of, digital education, digital classrooms, digital this, digital that. It's only 8% of the students, which is hardly any kind of education that we have to be expecting out of it. And when we look at technology in the context of gender, again, this is, if I'm not wrong, 2018 or 19. I forgot to mention it, yeah. So the total number of women who are online, women here is a correlation of everything that is not a cis male. That's how the study has represented it. they've not gone into the larger distribution. They've not presented the larger distribution. But if you have to say all non-cis male is women and cis male is alone the men, then the women's presence on internet is nearly about only 37%, right? Which is even more scarier because what the study importantly correlates is this line where we say women are nearly about 30 to 50% less likely to use internet for personal empowerment, right? Which is very important, which is exactly what internet is sold for all of us, saying, your personal empowerment is exactly there. You're growing, you get contacts, you get this, you get that. But the actual research suggests otherwise, where they're saying that half of the women who are on internet out of this 37% do not actually use it for personal empowerment. They probably use it for household activities. They probably use it for satisfying someone else's actions, requests, etc. But it's not actually used for personal empowerment, right? And this is the global snapshot. But when we specifically look at the urban landscape, only 33% of the women are actually on internet. It's not even 36%. It's less than the global average at this point in time. When we talk about the context of inequality, absolute poverty is a term that is defined by World Bank as someone who's earning about $1.08. That roughly boils down to 80 rupees a day, right? India does not have a definition of absolute poverty. We just comfortably call them below poverty lines. And in India, the average daily wage is roughly about 27 rupees a day for rural and 33 rupees a day for urban, right? For the BPL. Now, that potentially means that even if you have to correlate the World Bank's absolute poverty definition and the below poverty lines everyday learnings, then that potentially means that nearly about 21.92%, up to about 22% of India is actually way below absolute poverty. Not in absolute poverty, way below absolute poverty, right? So even if you have to take this number, 80 rupees, that's even say 50% of it, that's about 40 rupees. Not even the urban BPL earns 40 rupees a day, which is very important. And what is important for us to understand is we are expecting people from this to adopt to everything on technology, right? We are expecting them to invest this 33 rupees on technology and hope that it's going to empower them personally and their whole livelihood is going to be fixed out, right? While the most important thing is with this 33 rupees, I think their primary question would be, can I find a shelter for the day? Can I find food for the day so I can survive for tomorrow? Right. Now, given this is the context in terms of how we have to look at the society, let's look at the context of technology, right? For any of us to use technology, very simple, just have a computer and then have OS and then install 3-4 softwares and just maybe even just use Facebook, right? The total cost, if you have to look at, is the Windows, probably the Windows that you're using. I don't know if it's Mac, it's even costlier. The Windows 10 Home Edition costs nearly about 8,700 rupees, right? It differs from country to country, from where you buy, but on an average, it's roughly this. The cost of internet, as per the global internet study, is in India is ranging anywhere between 6 rupees per GB to 20 rupees per GB, right? And then you also need other licenses like the Office suite. In case if you're using Zoom, you need a Zoom license. If you're using Microsoft Office, you need another license. In case if you're using Adobe products, you need another license, right? I'm not accounting for those costs. I'm just assuming you're not going to use any of those. But if you're using some of those, that also gets added. A good laptop, a decent workable laptop today on an average costs about 30K, right? So which means on an overall, we're talking about 38,000 rupees plus other software licenses that you would want as a one-time cost that you have to pay. And then a recurring cost of internet, which is roughly at about 19.5 gigs, 5 rupees per gig, plus your online software license, your subscriptions that you're expected to have, etc., right? So what really is the cost of use or cost of access of technology is a very important question that all of us should be asking, right? If you're expecting someone who's earning 33 rupees a day to actually invest 38,000 rupees as a one-time cost, and by the end of this session that you're sitting on, if it's probably for an hour, you would have spent about 300 to 400 MB of your internet, right? So if you're setting in about 2 or maybe 3 classes, you've spent a gig of internet. 1 GB of internet you spend if you sit in maybe about 3 hours of your classes, right? It differs between Teams, Google Meet, and all of this, but on Classmate, it's about 400 MB. That is assuming nobody has turned on our videos, okay? Now, if you say 3 hours is what is going to cost you 20, 60 rupees, the family that we're talking about here can't even afford 3 hours a day. They can't even, in fact, afford 2 hours a day. And even if they have to afford 2 hours a day, it means that they have to go the whole day without shelter, without food, without every other essential things that they would require. This is really the cost of technology that we're talking about today, right? So while this is all happening in the real world, right, we have to analyze the technology world with a lot more detail. So this is the billionaires or the world's largest market capitalization companies. So if you look at 2006, amongst the top 10 companies that was there, except for Microsoft, there was nothing else that was in the top 10. But at the end of 2016, the top 5 companies were all technology companies, right? In terms of market capitalization by billions of dollars, Apple in this case was nearly more than $600 billion, which is all skyrocketed now even more because all of these companies have shown a profit of 30% quarter on quarter, right? So it's very important for us to understand this correlation. All of these companies, sorry, historically they used to be banks, right, or very large electronic corporates. That's what used to be, or here and there oil companies, right? But what we saw after 2016 is it's all technology companies and technology companies only which are taking over the top 10. This is the cost sheet or the investor documents that Google submits every quarter. This is, I think, September 2020. I'm sorry. The latest one has also come Jan 2021, so I have to update this. But yeah, but roughly, if you look at it, this is the total revenue that Google has earned. This is again a very public document. I have not taken it from anywhere. So all you have to do is search for Google investor documents. You will get the PDF, and this is one page of that PDF. That's all it is. Okay. Now, Google search and other things. Google search, from all of our understanding, is not something any of us pay for, right? But in September 2020, that generated a profit of $26,300 million, right? It's important to note all of this is in million. They have mentioned it here. YouTube advertisements got a profit of nearly about $5,000 million. Google properties, again, an advertisement thing, cost them about 31,000. I'm sorry. Google network member properties cost them again 5,700 millions of dollars. So overall, Google advertising is about $37,000 million is the total things that they have gotten, right? So it's very important to understand in about $46,000 million of revenue that Google got in this quarter, about $37,000 million, which is, roughly, even if you boil it down, which is nearly about 80%. 80% of revenue purely comes from advertisements. Okay, it's nothing else, not the products, not the services. It's purely coming from advertisements here, and here, right? Let's look at Facebook as an example, right? Again, this is Facebook's investor documents, again, a public document. I think this is also September 2020. So you're free to go recheck all of this data, right? Revenue in terms of advertising was nearly about $21,200 million. the total revenue from other expenses and everything was, where is it? Yeah, total costs and expenses is this. So income from operations is this. So roughly, if you see here, the total revenue that they've generated is $21,200, but revenue from other things than advertising is just $249, $249 million, right? Roughly for Facebook, this boils down to 99% maybe of your total revenue. This is the advertising revenue they have submitted by geography, the distribution by geography. So I am specifically going to be looking at Asia Pacific. I'm not interested in other parts, but it's very important to read the other parts numbers, right? Roughly, if you look at Asia Pacific, which is about 4,200 millions of dollars, is the total advertising revenue that Asia Pacific is generating in a quarter. Okay, in a quarter. I'm not talking in a year, I'm talking for a quarter. That's in 3 months. So in 3 months from Asia Pacific, Facebook generates an advertising revenue of $4,200 million, right? Now that you have understood this, if you actually go back and look at this data, you will understand why these companies are specifically on the top 5 right now and not any other company. Because every other company is forced to use these platforms for their own growth, while these platforms are the ones that are actually growing. Now, this is what we call as GAFAM. Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, the GAFAM, right? So what these top 5 companies are actually threatening us today is that we own your data, right? While they publicly may say, we love your data, we love this, we love that, we want to offer you such amazing things for your life, for your betterment. It's important to understand that what they basically are saying is, for the cost of your data, they're going to offer everything that you want at the cost of your data. Lavanya had a question. Right. In short, what these companies are potentially telling us is we are going to be profiting with everything you do. For example, the recent WhatsApp changes, be it, or the way Facebook has been growing, the way Google has been growing, the way any other services that the so-called services like Instagram, everything. For each of those, there is only 2 things that happens. The first thing is they come, they offer you free services, which is exactly what you will get addicted to. And once you're addicted to, once you think that you don't have a life outside of it, or your life so much depends on these platforms, they've already profited out of you, right? And if you actually read the 2021 Jan Facebook things, an average user is actually generating about $6 of revenue to Facebook, right? So just by you using your Instagram or WhatsApp or Facebook, you're contributing $6 a quarter to Facebook in terms of revenue, not in terms of total contribution, in terms of revenue, right? It's called ARPU, average revenue per user. It's while it sounds like, yeah, you know what, they have been offering all of this and they need something as a trade-off. The reality is the trade-off is not that they're offering something as a free service, etc., etc. The reality is that the trade-off that they are offering is actually our privacy, our clicks. So the Cambridge study on Facebook's app that came out, I think, in 2017 or 18, clearly called out that Facebook app tracks your location every 3 seconds. That's not 3 minutes, it's every 3 seconds, right? So which means Facebook wants to know every single step that you take, every single left or right that you take. And that's exactly what it means by I have to understand you. Facebook recently launched something called as suicide detector, right? I think in 2018 end, they launched 2019 early or something like that, right? So where they told we can detect if someone is having suicidal intentions. And what we will do is we'll immediately connect you to the nearest suicide shops or someone who's working on anti-suicide work. And then they will come counsel you. And then, you know, we have made a very positive impact on the society. But on the contrary, what they're basically saying is, I will understand every single mood of yours, every single thing, and I will decide who should contact you, who should, what you feel like, and then what kind of counseling you want, right? So all of this, in short, is called as empathy as a business model. What I mean by empathy as a business model is basically, I feel bad for you. I think model. The question really is, how do I know you should feel better or you deserve better? Is I know everything about you, right? So while empathetically these arguments may sound very solid, very amazing, the realistic world is that these arguments are not really that amazing when it comes from an advertisement company, right? Mind you, Facebook, Google, these are all not technology companies, they're advertisement companies. Their primary source of revenue is advertisements, right? And when an advertisement company is telling you that, we value your privacy, you tell us everything, we'll take care of your emotions, we'll tell you the right thing for the right thing. What they basically mean is, you tell us what is important, and then we'll tell you whose ad we should show it to you, from which we will generate the largest revenue, right? That's basically what they are telling right now.
Hi, Ram. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So my name is Chris. I work in advertising for social media. So I'm very much connected to what you're saying just now about people, the companies are using our data to make the money. But I have a few questions that I personally grapple with, or people ask me, right? Like what you talked about, the empathy as a business model. Wouldn't you think, see, I feel like people like you, me, or people who agree that privacy is compromised is small number right now, and the number of young people on the internet is so high. So shouldn't we encourage at least some form of empathy from these platforms? I don't know, because getting people off the platform is not easy.
I perfectly agree with you, right? Empathy is very important. Primarily, we as a society, we have thrived on empathy, right? Let it be our friends, let it be our relatives. Empathy is such a very important emotion for all of us, right? I'm not disagreeing with you there at all. The question really is, when it comes from a technology company that focuses on capitalization through advertisements, right? The question that we should really be asking is, what is the cost of this empathy, right? The question tomorrow, again, we should be asking is, okay, tomorrow, let's say Facebook has identified an empathy in the wrong way. What is the impact of someone's life on it, right? So the question is not really.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, so the question has never been that, should technology not do this or should not do it? The question always is that, do I have a choice if I choose not to have one? And two, at what cost? If I choose to have one, at what cost is it coming to me? Right? That's fundamentally the two questions that we should always be asking.
No, I agree with you. I'm just playing the devil's advocate here because sometimes I get stumped by questions when people ask me, isn't it better that they are trying? I mean, I maybe I will think about this and ask you again.
Yeah.
Because I feel like so recently I know someone who committed suicide, and it has kind of been relevant that that person was very much active online and blah blah. So when you said suicide prevention, I mean, suddenly I thought of this person because it has happened in my life, and this person who was probably as a young person who has access to Instagram, Facebook, and all of these places, which is full of so many things that can cause mental health issues. If the platform had probably given him a pop-up saying, do you want to call a friend or do you want whatever, wouldn't it have saved a life? So I'm coming from a personal experience. I'm just asking, like, how much can we?
What is more important to understand here is, Facebook has not published a data on how many people has it actually prevented, how many people has it intervened in, or does it even?
I mean, no, I don't want that data. No, I don't want that data. I'm just asking a hypothetical question. If this actually was executed and whatever, wouldn't it have benefited? Because the number of people in this world is so many, and that many people are on the networks.
Right.
So I'm just thinking it's not going to be easy to get them off the networks. So how do you better the networks, I guess?
Correct. So there are three things that we should focus on. Right. Replace Facebook with any ABC or XYZ. Right. My answer still applies. The first thing is when you're building something this sensitive, there has to be large-scale public consultation. First thing, irrespective of you are a private entity or a public entity, there has to be a public consultation on what is it that you're trying to achieve, how is it that this should be achieved, and you should accept public criticism on how not this should be done. First thing, right? The second thing that every company, in my view, should be doing is publish how they have actually implemented these things. I'm not talking about publish all of your lines of code, although that would be sensible. But what I'm demanding is you publish, is this really exactly the standards that you have adhered to? If so, how are you really, applying the standards into your own products, right? That's the second thing I would ask. And the third thing is there has to be a very frequent critical review of the implementation. If you personally ask me, I would say year on year, there should be a critical review, an independent audited review of the implementation so that we know the platform is actually implementing what we're talking about and not doing something else, right? The scary part that I'm trying to highlight is not that the platforms should not be implementing it, right? But what are the platforms actually doing in the name of implementing these, right? So there has still not been an established proof of these platforms actually doing something in these lines, right? But what we instead hear is, we are empathetic about this, we want to implement things like this, right? But there's actually no real world impact, right?
Sorry, I don't want to take too much of your time. I just want to tell you one more experience I had. I bought an electric vehicle recently, and I picked a vehicle that was only hardware, whereas all the ones in the market are the tracking location, everything. But when you go to the dealership, right, that's what the customer wants. The customer is very happy to know that I have all these features. Now, this customer is not thinking about show me your code and show me your company's values and what is the reason you're doing this. Nobody cares. So when you say public should be involved, is public even interested? I'm in Bangalore, and in Bangalore, I see that there's a growth of the middle class having more money, and they want all these features. They want the smartphone. They want that access to maps and whatever. So it becomes so complicated when you say public get involved. The public is like, I don't care. I'm very happy with these features. I'm happy that I can talk to someone across the world through Facebook. So I'm just curious on what you think on how to get the public to even understand that this is, bigger and problematic. When the public is just simply saying, I love these features, give it to me.
Right. So my simple answer would be to ask a question back again, right? We have policy that is established in our country, right, for safety, security, taking care of everything in these lines, right? Then the question really is, why do we still lock our doors when we go out?
Yeah.
Right? We have CCTV cameras, we have police stations, we have police beat patrolling everywhere. Then why do we lock our doors? I mean, like we can leave it open, right? Yeah. So this idea of theft, right? Irrespective of all of these systems, you have so much, you put in controls over controls over controls. The government or the people are never going to be educated to say that it's okay, now is a time you can leave your door unlocked because we have enough systems in place, the theft is close to zero. Right? That's not an argument that the government will ever take. Now, what did the government do for us to accept this argument is it went through years of education, saying, you have to take care of your safety. You go to bus stand, if you're wearing a lot of jewels, please take care of it. Please take care of your baggage. There is constant announcement. There is police going around and telling you the same, right? So you take any other thing that we are so very comfortably adhere to, which is like, I don't even have to think. It's like so common for me, right? Every one of this has been an outcome of education. Good, bad, ugly, keeping all of that aside, right? All of this has been an outcome of education, right? If I take locking your house as an example and comparing it with tracking my vehicle as a security process, Indians have never been educated about privacy, right? How many times do we see our actual mass media or anybody else actually debating privacy, right? Actually debating consumer rights in the context of privacy. Actually, the government coming out and telling people saying, you should care about privacy, irrespective of government being there or not, right? It has never been the case. And it will never be the case even in the near time future. Is this education will never come is primarily because now the agents of data, the government wants to be the agent of data right now.
Yeah.
The government is trying to take control of all the data. If you see the recent intermediary bills that got passed, the IT bills that got passed and everything, right? The government is trying to become the intermediary and trying to ensure that it is taking control of every single thing. Right? But what is very important for us to understand here is there is no alternative to education, right? Today, if we say that nobody cares about privacy, so there's no whole point about it. The point is, no, if today nobody is caring about privacy, we as privacy activists, what are we doing? Is a question that I will immediately ask, right? Isn't me or all of us here as playing the role of privacy activists in the society, isn't our responsibility to educate people no matter how? Right? Yeah. I'm not saying it's an easy process. It has its own downs, ups, it has its own people we have to fight. But there's no alternative to education. And today, there is no education at all.
Right.
Right?
And how would
so until education is happening, it would be the same scenario, is my view.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Right. So now that we have established these problem statements at the outset, right, it's very important for us to understand, or the most obvious question, the elephant in the room kind of a question is, okay, what is my alternative, right? But before I tell the alternative technologies, I want to present how I assess a technology, right? This is a very, very basic assessment that I do. I analyze technology based on the 4 A's. Of availability, accessibility, affordability, and adoptability, right? Availability meaning, am I or can I access software A? Can I access tool B, right? That's called availability. Accessibility meaning, is it in a language that I can understand, or if I am disabled, is the whole tool disability friendly, right? Or, if I'm probably not educated, can I still interact with the tool? Do I know what to do? So this is called accessibility. Affordability meaning, given my livelihood is 33 rupees per day, is that really affordable financially for me to do it? That makes it very important for me. Adoptability meaning, given all the three above satisfies, is it even feasible for me to use this tool every day, right? That's called adoptability. Now, it is these 4 lines that I usually use to apply to a software before we even look at the privacy and the alternative aspect of it. And these are very important things, right? Now, when we talk about alternative models, it's important for us to read about 3 important things. One is called the free software, or GNU Linux, or free software. The second thing, we have talked extensively about privacy. We'll talk even more about privacy in the next session. And the third thing is decentralization and federation. Okay, and how we can still be on the network, like Chris asked. How can we still be on the network and still adhere to probably models of empathy, probably models of sharing, right? And how we can achieve them with still less control on a few corporates having control over them. Now, going by the idea of free software is a definition that is given to a software. A software is anything. For example, Classmate is also a software, right? Your presentation tool is also a software. The PDF reader is a software. All of these are softwares. Now, a free software is usually a software that adheres to 4 rules that is defined by the Free Software Foundation. Or right, the first rule is you have the freedom to run the software for any purpose. Right, there's no restriction. Nobody can come and tell you, hey, you know what, you're not allowed to run the software for A, B, C, D purposes. Right. What you want to use the software for is your choice, but the software itself is never going to restrict you on how you have to be using the software. Freedom 1 says that everybody has the right, every user has the right to study the source code of the software, and if they think some modifications are required, they have the rights to make the modifications. Okay. Now, Freedom 3 says that there cannot be any kind of limitations on who can take the software and who can give it to someone else. Everybody has the rights to distribute the software for everybody else, which means if you compare it directly to your Microsoft operating system, you're not allowed to, once you purchase a Microsoft OS, you're not allowed to share it with your friends, family. You're not allowed to do anything or anything to do with them, right? It's only for you and only you're allowed to use it, and you still don't own it, right? Versus in the free software world, what we're talking about is the source code is available for you. It is there. If you feel like I want to read the source code, I want to understand it, or I want to change it, you have the rights to change it. Or if you feel like this is a good software, I want to share it with my friends, you're free to share it. And the last freedom is in case if you have done changes, which is the freedom 2, right, where you're allowed to make changes, you're free to distribute your version of the software also, right? There is no restrictions on whose version of the software can or cannot be distributed. Now, a good alternative for all of you to possibly start is to use your operating system to be GNU Linux, right? A good example, again, a start would be an operating system called Debian or another operating system called Fedora, right? These are all GNU Linux. So basically what GNU Linux is how your software is structured, all put together is called GNU Linux. But any GNU Linux distribution at the very core is a fully free software, right? So which means you have the complete operating system for you, you're free to make changes, you're free to give it to your friends, and there's no restriction amongst any of that. And one of the most common things that keeps coming apart, right, whenever we talk about these alternatives is sharing is theft, right? I mean, if you take your Microsoft OS and give it to someone else, it is not wrong. It is actual theft, right? You will be booked under intellectual property violation rights, and which can attract a fine of anywhere between 50,000 to 1 lakh just because you shared your Microsoft OS with someone else. Just because you shared your Apple OS with someone else, it can attract a minimum fine of 50,000 to 1 lakh, and if it is even more harsh, you could actually be jailed for up to 6 months, right? So what these companies are basically saying is, you have to pay 8,000 rupees for my OS license, and after paying 8,000 rupees, you're still not the owner of the OS or the software. And 3, if at all, if you share the software with someone else, then you're also committing theft or fraud, right? That's potentially what the technology company statement today is. Let it be Apple or let it be Microsoft. That's the actual statement these companies are making, right? On the contrary, what the free software and the decentralized, the free software world and the decentralized internet world says is, sharing is is not privacy, copying is not theft. Feel free to share it to anyone. For a community to grow, sharing is a very essential commodity. Sharing is more than a commodity, it is a very fundamental need and it has to happen. Okay. Now, when we talk about privacy, what the alternatives are talking about is that today privacy has been boiled down to human experience as a commodity, right? There is absolute disregard to privacy. It's very important to read this book called Age of Surveillance Capitalism. It's a big book, but it's a very brilliant book, where the author Shoshana Zuboff calls out this very interesting line. Surveillance capitalism unilaterally claims human experience as a free raw material for translation into behavioral data. Right? Shoshana Zuboff in the same book also further says that she makes this very powerful, very important statement. It is no more necessary to automate the data. It is now important to automate us. Right? So what the companies in the name of next level of AI-based innovation, next level of technology-based innovation is going through is not just normalizing or translating the data that we produce, they are normalizing and translating us. Humans itself is being translated into raw materials so that they can consistently keep profiting. Right, so these are some of the alternatives to, I mean, some of them may not apply to you, so you can ignore this, not this actually. You can ignore this and this, but I think apart from that, most of these you're still welcome to use. All of them are fully free software, so you don't have to worry. This solution called Classmeet is also a fully free software. The whole video conferencing system is a public code. Anybody is free to take it, share it, modify it. Anybody is free to run the whole thing. If you don't trust Classmeet, you're free to take the source code and run it yourself, right? So these are some of the alternatives. I'm not gone into alternative world, right, and exploring the alternative world, how it works, etc., which we will be doing in the next session. This session primarily I wanted to establish the problem or the threat that is existing to digital privacy today. In the next session, we will go into communities, what really is the way we can go towards establishing our privacy, what efforts can we take, and how should we correlate that understanding of digital privacy into real world privacy. Yes, so like it all is just a beginning. Ta-da. I'll open up for questions in case if any of you, okay, Chris has asked a question. Ram can answer at the end of the session. If we all go decentralized, how does one find violent group, for example, ISIS, tech? What empowered that group to rise to power? Okay, I'll answer this question in the next session because there are many things we have to understand in terms of decentralization federation before I actually answer this question.
Thank you, Ram. I'm also not sure how much time you would have if you want to set an expectation. So we will continue with question answer until that time, and then we may have to meet again next week.
I have another 15, maybe about 20 minutes. So 15 minutes, yeah, I do have. So yeah, I can take in questions until then. Yeah.
Just asking out of curiosity, so all of these companies or tech companies that give free software, then how do they earn their revenue?
All of these companies, I lost you after that.
The companies that offer free softwares, how do they earn their revenue?
Okay, awesome. So even if you take Chiguru's Classmeet as an example, we have the whole thing as a free software, right? So one model is to offer a subscription model, which is what we are offering, right? There is a free software and we host it and run it for you. So you don't have to deal with the technicalities, right? So we will write UIs, we'll write custom tools that you would need. And then for that, you will give us a small amount month on month. That is what we rely on for our livelihood. For example, in Chiguru's case, the number of people paying for Classmate is the livelihood that we rely upon for our salaries, for the company expenses, everything, right? That is one model. The second model is uh, in case there are big companies which say that, okay, hey, this free software lacks this feature, can someone write it for me? I'll pay you one-time fee, right? That is another model. It's called a consultation model. The third thing is many people actually hire free software developers in their company so that in case if they have any issues, these free software developers will be able to intervene. For example, many large technology companies actually hire very core free software developers, right? For example, there's something called the Linux kernel. So they hire these kernel developers and they pay them to contribute to the kernel. But how do they use? They are useful inside the company is in case if their company faces a problem, they don't have to go search for someone outside. They already have a couple of them sitting inside who will immediately come and solve the company's problem. Red Hat is a very good example. IBM is a good example. Right? Again, these are very big companies that we are talking about. In terms of small scale companies, it has always been services, consultation, and subscription as the only way of livelihood that we have been able to establish so far. Which is, I mean, if you look at this as an example and look at contrary Germany as an example, Germany has this, the government of Germany itself, Europe itself, has this idea called public money, public code. So which means any software that is developed from public's money should be a public code because it is the wealth of the people, right? Now, there the ecosystem is completely different because there a technology cooperative is actually recognized, actually established. So which means that the government giving contracts more than to big companies, they actually give contracts to small technology consultation companies, right? Because they have established a complete ecosystem surrounding it. So there are different models, but India is still at a very early stage. There's still so much for us to explore. At this point in time, many companies force themselves to not be on free software because the livelihood around free software in India is not in a very, very, very comfortable state. It's still in a strugglesome state.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, you mentioned something about the user being able to read the source code and modify it, but don't you need to have some expertise in the technology area for it?
Yes, absolutely true. Which is exactly where communities come into the picture, right? Um, for example, let's say you're a chef, maybe, right? And you don't know anything about source code or technology. You just say, okay, if I click this button, will it work? That's all the question that you want to ask, right? In such a scenario, what is the whole point of the source code being open or not? Is a very common question that is asked in this regard, right? So the answer we always give is very simple. A community never only constitutes of chefs, right? A community always constitutes of maybe chefs, maybe technologists, maybe people doing other livelihood. It always constitutes of everything together, put together, right? So just like each of us have a role and responsibility to play in the society, the technology people in the society's role and responsibility is to ensure that all of this is true, all of this is right, and that everything is kept public, right? So it is my role as a technologist to ensure that all of you are educated right on free software, privacy, and that all the software you use is not intervening or intruding into your life, right? So that is my role as a technologist in the society. That's actually how we have to grow.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Ram, I think in this data that you have presented, you have given us, it's wonderful presentation. I appreciate that you've shared the data about the big companies like Google, Facebook, and the five big companies. But what do you have to say about the business model or the commitment to privacy among the or other proprietary brands, like, for example, Discord, Slack, or in the Indian context, Koo and other social media that is emerging?
Okay. So there are three things that have to come in when we talk about regulations, right? One, you need a regulation itself, right? A law, a bill, a policy, something that can be talked about. And it's very important because if a country has to adopt a law, it has to go through public consultation and there is enough conversation. I mean, ignoring the fact how much government respects it, there is a set process for the whole thing and that happens, right? The first thing is the need for a law, and the sad part is the Indian law is in a very horrible state, okay? Just like everything else. The second thing that we need is we need a committee, a team, a ministry, whatever we want to call it, that sits down and actually evaluates the companies and their adherence to these laws and privacies, right? For example, if you take GDPR in the Europe, if I feel like my personal data was compromised, I can actually go to the court and sue the company, and the company, if proven, is liable to pay me a large amount of fine and also rectify the mistake, right? So you need a procedure around the law, right? The law itself is not going to solve anything. You need a procedure around the law. Now, the third thing that you need is you need people who are going to educate the law. There's no other, I mean, to both the corporates and to the commons, you need an education ecosystem that is built around the law that has been established, right? Uh, as much as I say, you may ask, like, why do corporates need, they're just supposed to build the most private thing. The reality is there are a lot of clauses when you start reading different laws put together on how a clause has to be actually read and how a clause has to be translated into an application, right? There's a lot of changes. There's lots of misreading when we have to do it. So we need all the three if we really have to establish. Now, in the Indian context, most of it is in a very horrible state. There is no committee to look into. There are no educationalists to do things. All of this primarily because the way the law itself is established is in a very confused and in a very horrible state. Right now, given this is the scenario, the companies in India have been adopting to two primary business models as a cost of privacy, right? One business model is things like Koo, where they say Atmanirbhar Bharat and everything. And they build an app initially funded by the government of India. And once they have built an app funded by the government of India, they immediately go the investor, the angel, the VC model. They raise funds left, right, center, trying to be the next big Twitter in India or the next big this in India. Why is it a very successful model, or why is it still a very convincing model? Is one, the population density that India has, and then when we correlate that to the statistics of internet users that we saw, all of these companies see that if 43% of Indian users on internet is generating so much of revenue, what would happen when 100% of the internet users are on the internet, right? That is the actual bet that these companies are putting on. That's exactly why you have things like Atmanirbhar Bharat, the VCs funding the Indian startups and all of this, right? It's all going to die out very soon. Because the way we are currently going in terms of this thing, there are structural problems. There is absolutely everybody who can actually access internet is on the internet, right? The question is the people who are not on the internet actually cannot afford it, right? And the government is nowhere close to talking about offering technology and internet fully free of cost as a fundamental right. So there is actually zero scope for growth in terms of internet users, right? So this is one model that many of the companies believe and they follow and they get funded for these things also. The collateral is very high in this, right? So the second model that many companies take is the predatory pricing model. Now, what the predatory pricing model does is basically I'll come in with a large amount of seed fund. A good example of predatory pricing model is your Ola, your Swiggy, your Zomato, Uber, Dunzo, all of these. Now, what these companies do is they come with a large sum of money into the market, right? And they start offering you discounts left, right, center, right? For example, when Ola initially came to Bangalore, I still remember the government set rate was 25 rupees for 2 kilometers, and then you pay per kilometer. Roughly for a 4 kilometer ride, it used to cost about 40 rupees, right? But what Ola promised was 29 rupees for 4 kilometers, right? Uh, to a customer, to me as a customer, I saved 11 rupees by choosing a platform. To an auto driver, I still got paid 40 rupees for the same 4 kilometers. So I didn't actually have a loss. I am still a government set rate. And two, the government the Ola introduced this thing called as incentives, which means if I do so many rides, I'll be incentivized by 1,000 rupees. So things like this. So I still have an extra incentive, unlike a non-platform world, right? Two. And three, Ola actually started going in a loss for every 4 kilometer ride. It actually started going in a loss of 11 rupees, right? But today, whatever price Ola says is the price, right? There's no concept of bargaining. There's no concept of debating, right? This is what we call as predatory pricing. A predatory pricing potentially is when a company starts with a loss, intentionally starts with a loss, and once it captures the market completely, where it is in a state of dictating the market, whatever ecosystem that it establishes is the ecosystem, right? That's exactly how predatory pricing is set in India. Now, what potentially happens here is now today, if you want food in Bangalore, at least everybody's like, hey, let's just Swiggy it, let's just Zomato it. Nobody says, hey, let's call the restaurant anymore, right? At least 2 years back, that is the ecosystem I used to see. I mean, if at all, if I have to order some food, we used to at best call a restaurant or we used to go to the restaurant. Today we are like, I don't care. I'll choose 4 or 5 restaurants. I'll order food from 5, 6 places, and it'll all come to my doorstep, right? But the question is, what is the cost of this? Is one, the prices that you see on Swiggy and Zomato is actually costlier than the ones at the restaurants. Very few restaurants keep the same price. Okay. And two, for most of the orders, at least today in Bangalore, if it is beyond 2 kilometers, you also have to pay a distance fee of 23 rupees, right? Delivery partner fee is what they call it. And the third thing, your the normal idli that you used to eat in the local shop was 10 rupees. Now, even for that 10 rupees, we are forced to pay a GST and other taxes and other charges. I don't have a problem with the taxes, but I have a problem with other charges, right? Section of the pricing. Now, a 10 rupee idli, thanks to Swiggy and Zomato, has now is priced at 18 rupees, right? It's no more 10 rupees. While the government would see it as a growth of economy and everything, what we're actually talking about, the poor still cannot afford the 10 rupees of idli. And when we make it 18 rupees, they're just not going to eat it, right? This is what we call as platform capitalism, where what does Swiggy actually own here, right? Swiggy does not actually own anything. It just owns a platform called swiggy.com, right? It neither owns the restaurants nor it owns the customers. We pay it, Swiggy keeps 30% of it, Ola keeps 30% of it, and the rest of it is given to the hotels, right? That's actually what is happening. Okay. This model is even more scarier because this model creates an economy called the gig economy. So gig economy is all of these delivery people that you see, all of the Ola, Uber drivers that you see, they are a part of the gig economy. Why? One, they do not have any guaranteed salary. Okay. Two, there is no incentives, bonus, there's no gratuity, there's no ESI, there's no PF, nothing. There's no government norms, right? Even if you don't drink water for the whole day, it's not Ola's problem anymore. It's not Swiggy's problem anymore. It's your problem. You go find a place where you can drink water. Okay. I'm going to pay you 20 rupees for every food you deliver. I'm going to take 30 rupees of the money that the customer paid for you on Ola or Uber, and I'm going to give you the rest of it. Right. For people sitting in AC room and just building platforms, taking 30% off and letting the people who are actually on the ground sweating in the sun and just giving 20 rupees, 10 rupees, which in many cases does not even cover their petrol expenses, right, is the actual thing that the Indian alternative model of ecosystem has actually created in the technology world, right? So these are the real two models that has been existing amongst the proprietary ecosystems in India. There are alternative models in other countries. I'm not going there, but in India, these are the two models of establishment that companies build our proprietary software. Any other questions from anyone?
Right, Ram. No, okay, you've answered my fundamental question, but I had a follow-up question. I mean, when it comes to brands like Facebook and Google and all, people go there just for convenience. But I'm seeing a lot of people who are consciously looking for alternatives, but then choose something like Slack or Discord or something like that as an alternative, as opposed to a free software solution. And in fact, some of these companies say that they value privacy more than, say, Facebook or Google. Is there any element of truth in those claims, or why is it not being exposed?
So Delphina, I think there are two things that come into context when we pull this argument up. One is I value my privacy, but there is a line I draw to how much my privacy is valued at, right? Two, what alternatives do I have in front of me, right? Obviously, when you take Slack and when you compare Microsoft Teams, Slack is much less privacy intruding than Microsoft Teams. Why? Because it's called the scope of the data, right? Microsoft tracks you right from your OS to your browsers to your internet to everything, and then also on Teams. Versus Slack just tracks you on Teams, right? So the total amount of data that Slack can collect versus the amount of data that Microsoft can collect there is a drastic difference between the two, right? I'm not talking about mobile apps. In mobile apps, I think they're all the same, but I'm talking about an ecosystem that is established to track your data, right? That is a very fundamental difference between the two platforms. Now, the second the second reason why people choose probably Slack over, let's say, something like Zulip or Mattermost, which are free software, is primarily because of the technological incompetence, right? Not in a wrong way, in a right way, that while they see these alternatives are good, much more privacy respecting, etc., the cost of me running all of this is not cheap, right? For example, if I have to run Zulip on just, let's say, even for Nirangal, for example, I need to spend at least about $15 a month, right, just to run Zulip, which is probably not affordable for Nirangal, right? $15 a month is nearly about, even if you keep it 75, 750, about 1,000 rupees, right? And if you're saying that I value my privacy in chat, and so I'll spend 1,000 rupees for Nirangal to use privacy respecting chat, next year email comes in, next year something else comes in, next year something else comes in, right? It never ends. It just keeps on going on and on and on. And the question really is, at what point can I stop spending and paying for my privacy so much, right? So the most obvious choice becomes, I have no other choice, but I need someone who will host all of this for me, right? I search for free, less privacy intruding alternatives, and Slack comes up, right? That's literally how decision making has been happening in the recent days, right? There's no escaping from the fact that it's not a lack of free software. It's just that what is going to be my impact? I don't want my work life impacted because I chose free software, right? Maybe the UI is different, maybe something else is different. And two, I am not in a state to spend money on technology tools because every penny I have, for in case of Nirangal, it could probably be, I want to spend on gender education, right? Why should I be spending money on technology, right? It's a very, very fair and a very fundamental question, right? Which is why I told, when we take Europe and India, for example, there's a contrasting difference because Europe still respects free software at a very extensive state, which has created an ecosystem for a lot of free software based companies to flourish and establish itself, right? Whereas in India, the government of India has absolute disregard for it, for both privacy and free software, right? And as a result, an ecosystem for free software is actually non-existent, right? Which forces many companies to not actually establish an ecosystem around free software. Unless you're again going to be backed by big VCs and your free software model is that solid, it's close to impossible for companies to survive in today's world. Okay, I think I can take one more question if there's any.
So I had this question like in schools right now, so in around like class 4 and 5, even in private schools, they are encouraging students to use Linux. So I was tutoring a kid, and he introduced me to Linux, whereas I had no idea about this. So do you think they are like schools, even the private schools, they are encouraging free software without even knowing the importance of it? Because I don't know why they chose something like that over Microsoft, but they do. So what do you think it might be causing this?
The third point, affordability.
Okay.
Right. I don't think India is ready to invest 35,000, 37,000 in just buying softwares. That's really the sad state we are on. And it's a very conscious choice, mind you, because the economy is not really going good, as the government is saying, right? The economy is actually going in a very horrible way. Now, which means the schools, even though by law you're not encouraged, the schools usually now will tend to choose free of cost solutions over non-free of cost solutions, right? Schools look at GNU Linux as a free of cost solution, not as a free software solution, right? Which is even more bad because now once you have seen something as a free of cost solution and then I introduce you something which can also be paid for, you will never accept it because in your definition, free software is free of cost, right? The labor that the developer puts in, the labor that the community has put in would usually get disregarded right now, right? So for the free software ecosystem, it would be problematic. In the long run, may not be right now, but it's still good according to me that people are still at least using it because you don't have to now introduce a new word. Once GNU Linux becomes like the obvious choice, you can just educate on the ideology, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because like even when like Sorry, I'm hearing my voice. Okay, I'll just type it out.
Hima, do you want to try to speak again?
Yeah. So what I wanted to say is that we grew up in school knowing that Microsoft was the only thing there is and you can't look beyond that. But here there are kids who are learning about different softwares without knowing their implications. But when they grow up, they will definitely learn more. And I don't know, maybe will be more aware about it and opt for free software. So I think there is that part of hope that I see.
I think when I was studying in school, the only thing we also knew was Microsoft,
Hmm.
right? And the reason we see hundreds of alternatives today, I think, is purely the technological growth and everything, which is why this slide is very important for us to understand, right? It was only in the range of 2016-ish when these companies actually started taking over market capitalization, right? So even by 2006, Microsoft was already in the market capitalization model, right?
Right.
That's one reason Microsoft knew this was happening, right? But today we know of much more things is primarily because one of this growth, and two, the primary factor that technology as an industry itself has been advancing just like every other industry. So what we see right now is just an impact of the larger growth of one industry that's taking over. That's the change that was probably in your age, my age, and right now.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I have to drop off. I have another office meeting. I'm sorry.
Yes.
But given my email, so feel free to reach me out on my email. That's one. Or if you still have more questions, we have another session, so you can put out questions. Even if you can put it beforehand, I'll see if I can address it during the session itself.
Okay. So we'll end the session now. Thank you so much, Ram, for introducing us to free software and online privacy. And we'd also like to invite every one of you to the next session that will be on 12th Friday from 9 o'clock in the morning for the second session of this, the continuation of this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.